Welcome back to the Dynasty Dummies Rookie Hootenanny 2025 edition, presented by Fantasy Cares, the beautiful folks over at Fantasy Cares. I'm included. I have to, if I don't say that I'm part of Fantasy Cares, Bob Gilchrist will come find me. He's in Vegas, so I got a little bit of time. But the Fantasy Cares is behind the production value that we've got. It's a beautiful thing being able to stream on this platform. I am so thankful to be able to donate my rookie write-ups to Fantasy Cares, which means that for a donation to fantasycares.org, you can receive my rookie write-ups when they're finalized and finished. So it's so nice to be over here. It's so nice to see you again, JMic. This is a fun rookie class, fun running backs, and I'm excited to talk some more with you.
Back like we never left. Great to be with you as always, Zach. Thank you again to the good people over at Fantasy Cares. And Zach, that includes you. Thank you for the opportunity to continue doing what we do here with the Dynasty Dummies Rookie Hootenanny. Zach, we're continuing the grind forward with running backs. And for those who may be checking us out for the first time, thank you all. We appreciate you for being able to tap in with us and going on this ride to be able to see, hey, what are the things that JMic and Zac are seeing in their film evaluations, talk a little bit about our process, talk a little bit about what has been and will continue to be long past this show, Zac, a very interesting crop of running backs that we get to discuss. And before we get to your musings, Zac, I got a quick story for you. I don't know if you recall the great Girl Scout cookie debate, the Girl Scout cookie wars
of the open bar.
Yes. Of the late 2010s, back on the Open Bar podcast. Shout out to my main man, Gabe Gearing. But they were dealing out Girl Scout cookies at work last week, Zac. And I'm not sure how hip you are to what's been up in the Girl Scout cookie game of late, but there are two flavors that are going essentially defunct, out of business per se. I don't know what the right word would be. Discontinued, I think is the right way to put that. One of which I don't even remember the name, so I'm not going to bring it up. But the one that I really want to talk to you about are the Toastiers. Are you familiar with Toastiers?
I'm not, because we don't have those up this way.
Okay, so Toastiers, and I don't want to pick up the package because they're extra loud, but essentially, if you would think of like a, I don't know, about yay big, maybe 3 inches by 3 inches, 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Looks like a little piece of toast. One side covered in like a white, like a light frosting. And essentially it's French toast flavored is what this cookie is. And there were two different folks at work where they, I said, hey, when Girl Scout cookies come, let me know. I'll support your kids. Happy to support. Well, here I am, 6 Toastier boxes later. Even though Tagalogs have long been my favorite, the chocolate on the outside, peanut butter on the inside. But Toastiers made a guest appearance this year because of the fact that they're going discontinued. So I've been sick every other night as I chow down on Toastiers. But hey, it's for the good of the Girl Scouts of America. So big shout out to the Girl Scouts of America. And it brings me to thinking kind of what is old is new again. And when we get to one of these players, Zac, I'm going to have a trivia. So make sure that you have your trivia hat on. Make sure that you're ready to talk about something and see if you can connect the dots for why these players are together before perhaps they're discontinued for good. We're gonna talk about that. But before we get into any more of my nonsense, Zac, you're a thinking man. You consistently push forward the boundaries of fantasy football and obviously game theory when we think through this. So what have you been thinking on? What's been on the mind of Zac Reed?
I was thinking about something else, but you got me on Girl Scout cookies, and now I'm thinking about Samoas and how I need to find a dealer outside of the New England area, because we can only get caramel delights up here, and those don't hold sway when Samoas are available. I have been having some interesting conversations on Blue Sky, and I got in one today with Toronto Dave. If you're listening to this show and you haven't interacted with Toronto Dave, he's one of my favorite humans. Not necessarily a fantasy analyst, but fantasy analyst adjacent. He's another one of those people like JMic, like Tommy Blair, who ask questions that I didn't even realize I needed the answer to until the question is asked. And this was not a fantasy football conversation. This was a mental health conversation, but we walked down the road toward the crux of disagreements and the crux of information, and landed on the idea of the why behind things being the most important part. Disagreeing is fine as long as you understand why the disagreement is happening, where the disconnects are. You don't necessarily have to beat people into submission and make them think the way you do. And I think this holds true for especially this when we talk through fantasy football, trivial things that don't matter. Like, we're going to get in big arguments over fantasy football prospects. It's going to happen. People are going to say, oh, that's a hot take, or, Quinshon Judkins is not everything that you and JMic say that he is. But I think it's really important to get down to the reasons why. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so important for us to do the rookie Hootenanny the way we do and explain things the way we do, so you know why we think the way we do and why we rank players the way we do, and why sometimes our rankings don't align with consensus, because we're coming at things from a different point of view. But there is a method to the madness. And I listened to Tommy Blair and John Hogue doing the Superflex Super Show and going back and looking at historically. So this week's episode was John Hogue trying to amass the Infinity Stones. He wants to Thanos snap his leagues out of existence. And the interesting part to me behind all of it was why he thought players were potentially going to be successful. And for me, I went back and listened to a show that I'd done with Peter Howard back 4 years ago, like spinning off of that Superflex Super Show, and went back and listened to me talk about Cooper Kupp, listen to me talk about the 2021 season before the 2021 season had happened, and listen to the reasoning, the thought process. And I think it's so important to listen to people when they talk about their thought process and the why behind the overarching what they think. Because if you don't understand why or how they got there, I think you're going to miss the point. And if you're disagreeing and you don't understand the why, you're not learning anything. And I think that is really unfortunate. If you don't grasp the why, if you don't take the time to listen to how people get to their conclusions, you're missing an opportunity to learn. And I never want to miss that opportunity.
And that's great insight, Zach. And it's interesting you say that. I had a meeting at work today where folks were teaming up to give a presentation, and there was so much that was being said that I did not really jive with in terms of process for how they go about a specific thing that we do with work and how we coach up our people. And by the time they got to the actual end point, they landed in the same exact place that I and many of my other peers at a different space would land. And just like you said, Zach, maybe I don't necessarily agree with someone's uh, opinion of the process of how they go about a certain thing. But when you understand the work that's gone behind it, and when you understand that, hey, they're free to think, just like I am free to think. They're free to do their research, like I'm free to do my research and have my process. When we land in the same place and get there in different routes, it's almost like when we have to deal with our kids with the our way of math as we were growing up versus this new math stuff that they're doing. So very, very similar space. Indeed. Thank you for sharing that, Zach. And I guess as a brief follow-up before we get into the rest of the players that we'll talk through this evening, what about learning other people's processes adds value to how you go about your process?
Well, so for me, I can either add pieces from other people's processes that come at things totally different, add them to mine, because I may be able to find something that makes me better or helps me understand. And at the very least, I find things that I don't want to do. So I can have somebody trial and error for me, and I don't have to make that mistake. I can see somebody, making that mistake, or trying a direction that I don't necessarily want to go in. So it's twofold. It's sometimes you pick things up that you want to incorporate into your process. It's similar to listening to, for me, Peter Howard. When I get done doing my rookie evaluations, when I get set, I start listening to Peter, and I start talking to Peter an awful lot, because he comes at things totally different. He comes at things with the metrics, and you hear me say this all the time, where guys who can scrape data and use metrics to kind of narrow down fields. JJ Zacharyson is another one who was fantastic at this. They can fish almost like they're trawling. They can throw out the huge gill nets and trawl, and they can look at the data of 200 or 300 prospects, where I'm limited. I'm line fishing, and I'm limited to watching probably 50, 55 players in a good year. And so to be able to borrow from their process to kind of crosshatch, to narrow down the field of players that I haven't seen that I should, is huge. And so, like, you can take pieces of process and add to your process, but you can also find places that you don't want to go, and that saves you the effort and time and ultimate either failure or frustration. And so again, it's and on top of all that, you figure out how someone else came to their conclusion, which I'm always interested in the way other people tick. And maybe that's just a personal thing to me, but I find that fascinating and also helpful, kind of traversing, because there are a lot of, if one person gets to a process that direction, there are going to be more. So it's valuable in a lot of different ways.
Like that. Yeah. Fine tuning your process is invaluable, I think, in this space, and really even in life. And I think that's one of the pieces of fabric that hold all of us together, is understanding we are a lot more alike than we think, if we take some time to stop and listen. So good stuff, Zach. Thank you for that. On to the next one. Let's talk about these running backs, Zach. 6 more running backs after we've already discussed the first 6 last week. And again, for whatever reason, if this is your first time at the Hootenanny, please check out the previous episodes. Check out the primer. Check out what we did last week in terms of talking about 6 running backs to get things started. That included Ashton Genty and many of the other favorites for a lot of folks across the fantasy football space and really the NFL draft space as well. But now we're getting into 6 more players. And Zach, the really interesting thing about this group of 6 is that we literally, during our catch-all, are going to be talking about players that are within our top 12 that we won't be talking about today. There's also going to be players today that we're talking about that may have snuck into our top 6 somehow, some way. This is a fun group. And they come in many shapes and sizes, but I think that one of the unique pieces about this group, not just because they're ultra talented, but this is a group of thick boys. A lot of larger players when we think about sheer size, or at least listed weights, and we'll see what comes about when we get to the NFL scouting combine and other spaces like that. But with what we've gotten from the Senior Bowl and what people have been listed at so far, we're dealing with some players who have a lot of rush attempts under their belt, have a lot of bell cow work under their belt, save for maybe one. But regardless, we'll get into the 6 players today, and enough of my hemming and hawing. Let's at least set the stage for who we'll be talking about today. First up, we'll talk through Cam Skattebo out of Arizona State. We will be talking through Dylan Sampson, running back out of Tennessee. Jordan James, running back out of Oregon. We'll get to RJ Harvey, the do-it-all running back out of Central Florida. And the last two, name that you've definitely heard before, Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State. And lastly, Tahj Brooks out of Texas Tech. So, Zach, it's really interesting. We have the juggernaut reincarnated. We have the great white hope when it comes to running backs in this class, Cam Skattebo, 5'11", 215. And Cam Skattebo had a really unique season here for the Arizona State Sun Devils. Last season, respectable numbers, 164 attempts for 783 yards and 9 scores. Gave you 24 receptions, which was also very positive. But in 2024, he turned it up to just ultraviolet rate, like just crazy stuff. 293 attempts, 1,711 yards for 21 touchdowns. He finished 5th in Heisman voting in 2025. He led the Big 12 in rushing attempts at 293, rushing yards, 1,711, and yards from scrimmage, 2,316. He adds with that 45 catches for 605 yards and 3 touchdowns, and obviously helps to lead this Arizona State upstart to the college football playoff. Cam Skattebo, rolling ball of knives, all the angry things that you can imagine when putting together a running back who's going to bring harm to the defense. Zach Reed, your thoughts?
The movie Hook boasts a cast of 6 Academy Award winners: Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman, Julia Roberts, Gwyneth Paltrow, Dame Maggie Smith, and Phil Collins. I bet you didn't know he was in there. Although Glenn Close has been nominated 8 times for an Academy Award, she never won. You don't remember her in Hook? Not the boo box! Not the boo box! Likewise, Cam Skattebo's steady brilliance showed up in unexpected places, and I think is being just a little overlooked in this bumper class of running backs. It may appear that Skattebo can be dismissed as a plotter, but I don't think that's the case. He may not have the fastball that some of these other top-end backs have, but Skattebo runs with exceptional pace, making his top speed appear surprising to defenders. He's constantly assessing and adjusting, processing the defender in front of him and the next defender as well. And I think it's his vision that allows him to reel off some chunk yardage plays without being particularly fast. And maybe the most impressive tool that Skattebo has at his disposal are his patience and his incredible leg drive. The man never stops churning. And I know, JMic, we had this conversation. There have been so many times where I stopped the tape thinking he's down. I take my notes, I start the tape again, and all of a sudden he's adding 6 or 7 more yards because he wasn't actually down. It's wild watching him.
Man. The approaching the line of scrimmage, obviously he is an absolute load, consistent power and forward motion, as you just mentioned, Zach. Defenders will literally bounce off of him often. Like, I don't mean like once every couple plays, once every few plays. I mean, like strings of plays where the first tackler is not bringing him down over and over. He does a good job of getting a quick sidestep at the line of scrimmage to allow him to find a little bit of space. Not that he's overly quick or anything of that nature, but he's able to navigate that well. He's got, at least to me, what feels like a contact balance. He is a pile carrier, if there ever was one. He's consistently delivering the punch by lowering his shoulders and eking out extra yards, shrugging off tacklers who attack him high. They have no shot at making the actual play. And while I do think that his vision's not necessarily special, meaning like, hey, he's not often finding tertiary holes or lanes or things of that nature that are seemingly out of nowhere, negative runs don't exist on tape form. And I think that out of like 9 games that I watched, I think I can count maybe 2 plays that were negative runs. And that's just because he got swamped in the backfield by a host of defenders. I could go on, and I need to stop because I don't want this to be an hour and a half long show. But there are a lot of things that I haven't even mentioned that I have here in my notes that are really, I did not expect to see him be as oddly nimble, even with a little bit of space that he gets at times. So he's something. And even in the pass game, didn't even mention that. He's a very smooth hands catcher that transitions well in the passing game. He's fun. He's a really fun prospect, and I'm really curious how the NFL is going to see him. But what weaknesses or what things did you see in Skattebo's game that maybe not so enthused about?
So all of the patience and the pile pushing ability in the world isn't going to completely make up for Skattebo's lack of speed. He's not fast enough to get the edge, even at the collegiate level. And he lacks the acceleration to pull away and pull off breakaway runs. Even when he's not intending to try an ill-fated run to the edge, Skattebo can get strung out to the sideline when he's unable to find a path off tackle, and he just continues to work outside, which is not a path to success for him. Because of his physical play style, Skattebo initiates contact in one-on-one situations head on when I think it would be better for him to glancing blow and drag a defender for extra yards. So it doesn't happen all the time, but there are times where he's just like, I'm going to bulldoze you, and he ends up in a heap instead of adding the extra 4 or 5 or 10 yards that he can, when he's carrying the entire pile. While Skattebo's lost boy comp is probably thud butt, he's more than just a pounder. Skattebo can handle all 3 downs. He can run inside and a little bit off tackle. And his combination of power, patience, that inside vision and quickness and balance has potential to make him a problem at the next level. I think defenders will be trying to avoid the boo box. Like he can play.
He can play. He can flat out play. Carried an entire offense this entire season. And I know some people will think, well, it's the collegiate level. We've seen guys who were not plus athletes be able to carry teams in this instance. And I got to tell you, even though he has his drawbacks, especially when it comes to quickness and even in top end speed, there are still so many instances where he is finding open space. And he is running a long way, even though he eventually may get run down. And sometimes where he's not, and he's just winning in that sense. But yeah, I'm shocked. One of the things I did want to point out, because I thought it was really fascinating. I don't know if you remember this, Zach, and you have a much better memory than I. But one of the things I noticed about Skattebo, his dexterity, or I guess lack of dexterity for sharp movements and cuts in terms of when he's at a higher speed or higher speed for himself, doesn't really stick out. And he's got this tractor trailer type of turn that takes time, and it's reminiscent of Leonard Fournette when he tried to turn and get this one arm going and looking like he's like a 1940s boxing match where he's about to knock someone out with an arm. It's fascinating. But top end speed, definitely a question. But man, Skattebo, I think, is going to be fun, a fun one to see where he ends up landing in the actual draft. Next up on the list, we've got running back Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, 5'11", 201 pounds. And I don't know if this age, I think the age that I found is right. He was September of 2004, which would put him at 21 years of age. Or no, would that be 20? He'll be 21 later this year in September, which I found like wild. Pretty young guy, pretty young back in terms of the group that we have. 2024 SEC Offensive Player of the Year. He leads the SEC in rushing yards, 1,491. He led the SEC in rushing touchdowns with 22, and yards from scrimmage, 1,634 yards. Last season, he plays quote-unquote second fiddle to Jalen Wright, while Jalen Wright continued to break off long runs and show off the dazzling speed that he was able to in that wide-open offense. But Dylan Sampson, his opportunity this season, 258 carries, and again, the 1,491 yards that we talked about with 22 touchdowns, adding 20 receptions, 143 yards, no scores through the air. But again, ultra productive player for a Tennessee offense that wasn't quite as prolific as it's been under Josh Heupel the last couple of seasons, but he was doing every bit of his part to be able to make things happen for the Volunteers. Again, this is a portion of the program as a University of Kentucky fan that saying nice things about someone who went to Tennessee, not my strong suit, but we'll see what we can do. So, Zach, I'll give you the honors here.
If Dylan Sampson wins NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year honors next season, he won't even be the first running back from his high school to do so. Both he and Eddie Lacy are alumni of Louisiana's Dutchtown High School, although Sampson does have the distinction of being the Griffins' all-time leading rusher. At the University of Tennessee, Sampson worked into a bell cow role this past year, putting up nearly 1,500 yards and 22 touchdowns on the 258 carries. He did much of his damage off tackle and getting to the edge, using that initial burst that he has to the line of scrimmage to catch defenses off guard. And then he's got exceptional open field vision too, and he used that to rip off chunk runs. Sampson is also very creative in short spaces. He utilizes his patience, his vision, and his quick decision-making. He's a crease runner, and when we talk about crease runners, and we're going to talk about one later that I think may be one of the best crease runners that I've seen, but a player who can find a small hole that most other backs aren't necessarily getting through. And he does this. He gets skinny through the hole, and then you see Dylan Sampson burst into daylight on the other side. I really like a lot of what he does as a runner.
Yeah, Zach, and the start-stop for him, I think, is tremendous. His ability to get defenders off balance with that change of pace within the run is a joy to watch. I think he's a tough runner who is consistently getting extra yards with leg drive to be able to close the run. He's got a low center of gravity, and one of the really cool pieces I think for him in this group is he does this unique dip under because he's consistently running at a very low space, which I really like, and that allows him to not be overpowered in many instances when he's bringing it. Let me be very clear, because I think there's more to come on that. He's another guy where tacklers often lose if they're attacking him high because he's bouncing, spinning, he's carrying consistently for additional yardage, and I think that when he's in space, he's got the speed to be able to run from most players. But again, there's a reason we're talking about this player on the second six versus the first six when we open this up. Tell us a little bit about Dylan Sampson and what he could have been better at.
As you might expect from a slightly undersized back, Sampson doesn't have much power either when he's trying to push either when he's trying to push piles or when he's trying to break through tacklers. And this makes him over-reliant on speed to win inside. And although he's a pretty good problem solver when the solutions are immediately available, I think Sampson struggles when an initial defender gets on him quickly or when the gap that he intended to run through didn't open up. And so I think he struggles with those sort of things, not necessarily creative in the one-on-one or adaptive. In the current iteration of NFL backfields, I think Sampson seems best suited to a space back, utilizing his speed in open areas. Efficient touches as the lightning in a thunder and lightning tandem would make Sampson immediately fantasy relevant, with potential for more juice because of his proven ability to shoulder a larger carry load. So he's probably one that's going to have to grow into a real big fantasy role, but landing spot is going to be really important for him.
And when you talk about landing spot, Zach, one of the questions that I had was, how much of a beneficiary of space is Sampson within this Tennessee offense? And I think about that in the way of Bucky Irving last season at Oregon. Tennessee has this propensity to spread you all the way to the sidelines. And in a college game that has super wide hash marks, they are stretching defenses horizontally, which is fascinating because it allows for creating more creases for players to be able to navigate, specifically in the run game, in between the tackles, or even when they're trying to hit the edge. And so one of the things that I found, even though I think that his vision is mostly good, he does have a tendency to dance at the line of scrimmage when there's traffic. And that chaos in the front leads to indecisiveness at times for him, which was really bothersome because there are times where he navigates that space really well. Also, arm tacklers who are attacking him low tend to get him off balance often. And so if they attack him high, I feel like he's able to win a lot of those. But seemingly he's allowing defenders in on his legs often, and that stops the momentum before he's even able to really get going. Sampson, someone that I think is a good player, and while this pains me to be able to say these kind things about him, I think ultimately he put together a really strong season and really good tape this year. And once again, curious to see where the NFL is going to value him. And if for whatever reason, and I'm not comping him to Bucky per se, because I had Bucky tied for 2 in the class last year for me. I like what Bucky was able to do between the tackles more, but Dylan Sampson, I think, flashes some of those same pieces, which I find fascinating. Speaking of Bucky Irving and the likes of the Oregon Ducks, let's talk about Jordan James, who for the Oregon Ducks, again, another 20-year-old here, one of the young guys. He'll look to be 21 in March. In 2023, he actually led the Pac-12 in yards per attempt at 7.1, which I found fascinating. And in 2024, his best season, obviously after Bucky Irving had already gone to the league, we're looking at a guy who was third in the Big Ten in rushing yards with 1,267 and second in yards from scrimmage, 1,476, and second in rushing touchdowns with 15. Just a lot of really solid production from him this past season, even with 26 catches for 209 yards through the air. Jordan James, with everything to his lonesome, showing you what he can do. Zach, what can Jordan James do?
I think it might be quicker to run through the schools that didn't recruit Jordan James to play running back. After averaging 122 yards a game and scoring 50 touchdowns in his final 2 years of high school, James had his pick of Power 5 schools before ultimately landing in Oregon. And it's tough to blame him, though. That nightmare green, those home unis, those go hard. As a sophomore, Jordan James worked his way into 25% of the share of Ducks carries behind Bucky Irving. And this past season, he assumed the workhorse role. One of the most impressive tools in his arsenal is the ability to pick through traffic at his feet. That, combined with his contact balance, his tackle breaking prowess, either running through arm tackles or employing that spin move that he's got to get away, and his low pad level at the point of contact, he nearly always adds extra yardage at the end of his runs. And although James only saw 26 receptions in 2024, I think he has very solid hands out of the backfield. I think he can be a pass catcher.
Yeah, and he's consistently attacking the line of scrimmage quickly and with high energy. Like he is kinetic energy personified. I feel like when he's approaching, and I kind of have it as an opportunity and an observation, that spin move that you said, Zach. I noticed that as well. He loves to spin a lot, often. And so it's interesting because he's got the footwork to be able to employ that spin, but I don't see a ton of other dynamism when it comes to the open field and his ability to creatively solve problems in space. I don't want to get into cutting him down already, but I do think that with the chop, he's able to pick through and do some positive things. So let's transition over into some opportunities for Jordan James going forward.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with James as a ball carrier is his lack of finishing speed. When he breaks into the second level, he does not have a sustained top end to break away from defenders. And I think his open field vision is lacking as well. James will run in chunks, but he does not have that home run ability that wins a fantasy week in one play. He also has a really bad habit of turning his body sideways when he's in blitz pickup. And I mean, maybe it's that spin move that he's using, but it narrows the width of his block and allows defenders to get through and get pressure on his quarterback. And if you're going to be a running back in the NFL and you're going to have the bulk of carries on a team, I think you need to be able to at least pick up that blitz occasionally. He's not great at it. While Jordan James doesn't have the most exciting profile in the class, I do think he's a steady runner who is efficient with his touches. He feels fairly safe as a fantasy pick, albeit without the overall peak production as a lot of players in this class. So he wouldn't be at the top of my list, and I know we'll get into this, but he's still a player that I think in the right situation, given time, could end up being a moderate fantasy producer.
Yes, and I think that's one of the interesting pieces with Jordan James here, Zach, in this class, as a fine player, he's likely to be overshadowed. Yeah. in my opinion, spin, run hard, and what else do you have for me that has you standing out from your peers? And I do think that anytime there's congestion around the line of scrimmage, it slows him way down. And I talked before about how Oregon likes to spread things out, similar to Tennessee. When there's congestion, I feel like his processing and decisiveness seem delayed in traffic. I do think he also reminds me, not his total style, but specifically this one thing. Lack of vision between the tackles will get him in trouble at times. And it reminds me a lot of a guy that I think you and I were both pretty complimentary of last season, Marshawn Lloyd, who I felt like his lack of vision between the tackles would get him into trouble, but then somehow, some way had the athleticism to be able to bounce and find space otherwise. And not that James's speed is anything special at all, but similarly how he was able to win in that sense, it reminded me a lot of Marshawn Lloyd. So Jordan James, productive player at Oregon this past season, curious of what his ability to really explode at the next level would look like, and how he would bring, I guess, quality against his other peers, I guess is the best way for me to put it. Moving over to RJ Harvey here, Zach, out of Central Florida, 5'7", 207. And for what I found online, and we talked about all these young running backs. I think the age that I found for RJ Harvey, if this is right, was 24. He just turned 24. Is that right?
Yeah, he started in 2020 at UCF. So,
Phew, ooh, doggy. Okay. I saw that, but I was trying to figure things out. And even when I was looking on his college sports page or college reference page, there was a jersey that said he started at Virginia and he transferred to UCF after that 2019 season. So I guess that makes sense. So it's a lot of time on campus. But in 2024, RJ Harvey, again, super productive. He led the Big 12 in rushing yards per attempt at 6.8, rushing touchdowns 22, and touchdowns from scrimmage 25. Man, again, that's 232 carries, 1,577 yards, good for 6.8 a carry and for 22 touchdowns. Also giving you 20 catches for 267 yards and 3 scores. The prior season in 2023, he was pretty similar, Zach. He averaged 6.3 a carry, over 1,400 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns. And also, just to make sure everyone's on the same page here, while he was second in the Big 12 in rushing yards at 1,577, that was good for 6th in all of college football. RJ Harvey getting things done, not just in the American Conference, but even when they transition over to the Big 12, where they infamously don't play very much defense historically. But hey, who am I? Who am I to judge? RJ Harvey, Zach Reed, floor is yours.
The center of a black hole is infinitely dense. Its gravity pulling in all matter around it, even light. And the point of no return is called a Schwarzschild radius. It's the closest you can get to a black hole and still be able to escape its gravity. Only slightly less dense is UCF running back RJ Harvey, carrying nearly 200 pounds on that 5'8" frame. Like, he is dense. He is compact. Harvey is an interesting case, though, because he can win inside even though he's undersized. It's the Devin Singletary paradox. He is a very creative cutter. He uses jump cuts to get himself laterally into free space often. Harvey's burst, getting to the line of scrimmage, and his second-level acceleration make him a danger to get loose at any time. And once he gets into open space, man, he has got the long speed to house one.
Yeah, and anytime he's approaching the line of scrimmage, Zach, and I think you alluded to this, it seems to be little wasted movement from him. He's looking to get north quickly. And even though I think in many instances of what I was able to see for him, he's quicker than fast, but his aspirations are to be able to stay square and find the seam soon, even though there are instances where he gets caught dancing in traffic. But nonetheless, if it's blocked well, or if he's able to leverage those jump cuts that you were talking through before to find a hole, he is going to. You don't have to worry about him getting what's blocked. And I think that there is something to say that that's a positive trait. And I know sometimes people can kind of use that as like a throwaway, like, oh, this player is able to get what's blocked. But if there's space to be found, he finds it and he gets it. And I think that specifically with UCF's inconsistent passing game, more this year than last, because I think that Javon Baker, we talked about before, Javon Baker being someone who in 2023 was just a joy to be able to make things happen, and why haven't the Patriots done more with him? Nonetheless, I think that RJ Harvey is a player that when his hands get on the ball, even though he's got, I think, strong hands in the passing game, when he's got his hands on the ball, positive things are going to happen. And I think that that's something in a class of players where you want to see the upside. I'm curious. I think that he may have a pretty high floor among this group. But with that said, what observations or weaknesses did you find in Mr. Harvey's game?
So those quick lateral cuts get RJ Harvey out of trouble often. But when there's not an immediate path to success, those cuts become a dance that stalls his progress behind the line of scrimmage. And you mentioned that already. There are also instances when Harvey gives up ground trying to find that game-breaking solution. And you talked about Skattebo never having a negative play. I think Harvey's negative plays happen, but they happen out of a good place. Like they happen because he's trying to hit that home run. Sometimes it's not a pitch that you can handle. And he ends up, losing yardage instead of simply going forward to avoid that loss. As a problem solver, Harvey has really great peripheral vision, I think, but sometimes he lacks that straight ahead vision, tending to have a lot of motion, but not enough movement.
Preach.
And I often look at basketball as that point guard when we talk about movement, and the same can be said for receivers, but with running backs, when they're coming to make a play on a defender head on, you've got to get a defender to commit to one side, have that leverage. And then when you attack, you need to attack in two directions. You need to attack laterally and vertically, because once you beat the defender, now a defender has to make up two directions to get back in front of you. I don't think he does that. I think he moves a lot, thinks he's doing something, but ultimately is dancing. RJ Harvey took the bulk of carries at UCF, but I think the NFL tends to be a touch more conservative when it comes to smaller lead backs. Harvey feels like a pass catcher profile to begin his career, but he's a pass catcher plus, because I do think that he can take control of a backfield if the opportunity arises through injury, that sort of thing. He's got that potential to add more touches, and I think he will be efficient even on the smaller touches that he starts with. Perhaps not an immediate impact, but I do think he has the talent to work his way into a productive role for fantasy down the line.
And when we talk about that higher floor, Zach, or that I mentioned, and I think that you're alluding to, especially with his profile as a pass catcher plus, I there are a couple of things that I see that I don't quite understand when it comes to Harvey, because at least for me, I don't know that I found his acceleration to be something that was special. Because I think that when he looks to change speed, I think that he, like you said, is doing more than he thinks he's doing, like a lot of motion and not enough actual movement. And so I don't know. I think that his acceleration does seem low. And when you pair that with what I think is a lack of creativity once he gets to the second level or open space, where many times he is just looking to be able to lower his head and take on folks. And I'm just like, hey, at your size and with the tools that I thought that you have and exhibit some of the time, I would expect him to be able to make more things happen, specifically in space. And it was strange just to be able to watch that and not see the creativity from him, the not chaining moves together, and quite often not winning one-on-ones at any level. Line of scrimmage, second level, third level. Yeah, confounding. All right, Zach, we have reached a portion of the program where we are going to have a little bit of trivia. And by a little bit, I mean a very little bit, because it more is just a kind of a name association or word association. And I'm going to give you three names, and you're going to tell me what they have in common. Okay?
I'll do my best.
All right. Awesome. Chuba Hubbard, Braylon Allen, Ollie Gordon. What did those three players have in common? For those listening via podcast form, Zach is motioning the think of the biggest, baddest roller coaster that there is near you, or maybe that you've been to, and how the bottom may absolutely fall out. And when we think about those three players, sure, Chuba Hubbard went to Oklahoma State, just like Ollie Gordon did. And sure, Braylon Allen is a really big back who had a really uber productive second to last season. We come to Ollie Gordon as the latest iteration of what do I do with that? Zac, Ollie Gordon, 6'2", 225.
Big
man
boy.
just turned 21 years old. 2023, couldn't tell that man nothing. The world was his oyster. He finishes 7th in the Heisman voting in 2023. He's the Big 12 Player of the Year. He leads the NCAA in rushing yards with 1,732 yards, and he leads the NCAA in yards from scrimmage, 2,062 yards. Scores 21 touchdowns. Catches 39 balls, 339 yards, and a score. And then 2024 happens. Dun, dun, dun. Zac. 190 carries. 880 yards. 13 touchdowns. 29 catches, 179 yards. And I'll spoil the goods now. I liked so much of 2023 Ollie Gordon because you saw a very clear way that if and when he got to the next level, he could be super productive and be the lead back in a committee and really carry the mill, I think, to a large degree. Similar to Braylon Allen, and I wasn't as high on Braylon Allen's 2020 prior season or his final season, but similar to Chuba Hubbard, who did a very similar thing. We get to this final season. The offense looks like a wreck. The passing game isn't there. And the player that I once knew does not seem to be the player that we have now. There's a question wrapped up in there somewhere, Zac, but really Ollie Gordon is my cognitive dissonance. He is my, what was it? I can't remember the TV show, or it might have been U2 or somebody. Who are you?
Yeah.
Like, is that, I can't remember the show, but
it's the, yeah. That was one of the CSIs.
CSI. I had NCIS in my head, CSIs. Really enjoyed that. But that song blows in my just goes in my mind. And that's what I think of when I think of Ollie Gordon. Ollie Gordon, who are you? Zac Reed, I need you to tell me, who is Ollie Gordon to you?
Oklahoma State football was abysmal this year. The team lost all 9 conference games. They gave up 101 more points than they scored. And if you do a Google search, the first hit returned is their 52-0 loss to Colorado. Maybe it's a Cowboy thing, but they were bad. In the midst of all that ineptitude, though, Ollie Gordon kept running. One of the most patient ball carriers in the 2025 class, Gordon routinely sets up defenders and allows his line time to develop blocks ahead of him. Surprisingly, for as big as he is, he has the ability to break long runs, getting up enough speed in the open field to keep his 225-pound frame ahead of pursuing defenders. Gordon can cut 2-directionally at speed as well, allowing him to use angles to his advantage. And I think he's a decent pass catcher too, with the skills to adjust to poorly thrown balls, to haul in screens and transition quickly back to being a runner after he makes the catch. So a lot of things to like about Gordon in spite of such an ugly season.
And it's insane to me, Zac, when you think about 2023 to 2024, one of the things that I thoroughly enjoyed about Ollie Gordon's game was that early penetration did not mean the play died with him. and you talked about this beautifully in that having the ability at his size and just watching him play in, play out, be able to one step hard cut, make one person miss, find the space, and then maybe not have the top end speed that's really going to house a lot of things, but having enough speed to put pressure on the defense at the size that he was looking to make defenders miss often in 2023. And I don't know if he was hurt this past season. I don't know if it was just feeling run down about how awful the offense was in 2024. But we watched a guy that I thought was really creative in the open field. And to be quite clear, my favorite of these 6 players when in space, because he does the thing that I think you and I really enjoy specifically from receivers, where he plays the geometry game, plays the lines, plays the blocks, leverages the momentum of defenders to be able to make cuts and maximize the run, specifically in space. One of the few players that I think in this group sees through to the next level really well. 2023 was a lot of fun for me. And I was like, all right, if I get to 2024, Zach's gonna be upset with me because I'm gonna fool around and have this dude rated way up here. But then 2024 happened, and I think that it was almost as though he began to lower his head in many instances where I felt like in the previous season he was cutting for space. And some of that brilliance and creativity, we'd see flashes of it, but it wasn't carried over often. And I don't know what to do with the information, Zach. What are your drawbacks when we think about Ollie Gordon?
Unfortunately, for as adept as Gordon is as a receiver, I think he's overmatched trying to pass protect. Whether it's a design matchup or a blitz pickup, Gordon kind of vacillates between either diving at a defender's feet or simply flailing his shoulder and kind of letting the defender by. Gordon's speed and even his ability to cut is derived from those long strides that he has, but he struggles when he gets boxed in and his steps get choppy. He also slows down considerably when he's trying to cut laterally to change his attack trajectory when those steps get choppy. Maybe the most egregious of Gordon's flaws, though, is his pathological need to hurdle people. Leaving his feet takes away any chance of changing speeds or cutting, changing directions. I think the NFL draft is a unique opportunity for a player like Ollie Gordon to shed the stink of the past and carve out a new successful path at the next level. And for his part, I think Gordon brings a 3-down skill set. He's got that long breakaway speed and he's got unteachable size. He should definitely be on your rookie draft radars. I don't know where he'll be drafted in the NFL draft, but man, I think that he could end up being a steal in rookie drafts.
No question. And I resolved this day, February 18th, 2025, that if Ollie Gordon gets any kind of draft capital, a lot of rosters, Zach. A lot of rosters for me. All right. Last, certainly not least, even though Zach ran the bus over me prior to, we talk about this last player here, Tahj Brooks. I hadn't watched him yet, but Zach had, and so we're adding him here to make sure that we talk through him. And I was able to get him watched prior to today's time, and really interested to be able to talk through and hear more of what you've got to say about Tahj Brooks, Zach. But again, on the numbers that I could find here for Tahj Brooks, running back out of Texas Tech, good old Red Raiders out of Lubbock, 5'10", 230. Well, how big a boy are you? 22 years old. And in 2024, he led the Big 12 in rush attempts with 290 attempts, and he was number 3 in yards per attempt. And again, in these last 2 seasons, his most productive, again, 2023, 290 yards, 290 carries for 1,538 yards, 10 touchdowns, 29 catches and 72 yards on those. His second senior season, per se, COVID senior season, 286 carries, 1,505 yards, so pretty much identical. Again, good for 5.3 a carry, 17 touchdowns this time, and again, another 28 catches for 199 yards and a score. Tahj Brooks showing that the running game in Texas Tech can actually be a thing. What? Zac, Tahj Brooks, it's on you.
Octopus are crease runners. It's really difficult to contain them. They're notorious for escaping aquarium tanks and either entering other tanks to hunt or simply bolting for freedom. And regardless of how big they appear, as long as their beak can fit through the hole, the rest of them can too. And I think sometimes Tahj Brooks's film feels like watching an octopus. Brooks is over 220 pounds, and yet he has the ability to contract himself to squeeze through holes at the line of scrimmage and emerge on the other side full-sized. He's got very good vision as well. I think both picking his way through the interior and also seeing openings outside of the tackles. Brooks has excellent contact balance, absorbing contact and continuing on. And I think he also is one of these guys who nearly always finishes forward at the end of runs. So I really like a lot of what he does.
Patience abounds with Tahj Brooks. He's a player that will wait and wait and wait at times. And when it works out well for him, it works out well for him. There are instances, I feel like, all over his tape where he is able to find space and really shock a defender at the line of scrimmage. There are some other things that happen at the line of scrimmage that I'm not exactly excited about, but your point is very well taken, Zac. When we're thinking through finding the actual space that is to be had between the tackles, I think that Tahj Brooks is able to do that pretty well. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about him in pass pro, Zac, I watched a play where he ducked his head and it ended up getting his quarterback hit as he threw. And he was like, he looked at the quarterback and goes, my bad. That was on me, my bad. And for the next 3 plays, he took on a defensive end one-on-one and held up just fine. Yeah. He took on a blitzer, I believe, on the very next play after that, held up pretty well. I forgot what the third play was, but 3 plays in a row consistently being in pass pro and really making a statement. And you'd see it all throughout the film where they're trusting him to be able to pick up certain folks one-on-one, and he's holding his own really well. I think that's that low center of gravity that he's got, that strong base. If he's not lunging, he's able to hold up and not get bullied in pass pro, which I think is mostly a positive too, especially for a player that when in space, and ideally he'd get more opportunities to catch the ball at the next level. I think that there's more to be mined out of Tahj Brooks's game that Texas Tech wasn't really able to pull out of him. And I could be crazy because we talked about before, the NFL is not necessarily a developmental league, but I think there's more to be enjoying when it comes to him. But again, Tahj Brooks, final player on the docket tonight. Zac, what are your drawbacks about his game?
3 straight seasons of 25 or more receptions might feel like Brooks is a lock to be a pass catcher at the next level, but I don't think that's true. I think he's very slow to present a target to his quarterback unless he's got a very strictly designed, quickly developing screen. Brooks is a poor route runner as well on anything outside of the flat. And I think as a pass blocker, and you mentioned he's very good as a blocker with technique. I think he will misidentify blitz pickup assignments sometimes. And you can't do that too often before the quarterback is going to have you out of there. And even though he runs with power and balance, I think Brooks is susceptible to ball control issues and punch outs where like he gets a little cavalier with the ball in traffic and he'll carry it in one arm and you'll see guys come in and swing and knock that out. At the NFL level, every single defender is looking for that punch out. And so I think that could be an issue. There may be a lot of cephalopods in the sea of this 2025 running back class, but I think Tahj Brooks is definitely one of note. He can carry the ball between the tackles, he can get outside, and he can carry the ball at the goal line. And I think the chances are that he finds himself relevant sooner rather than later. This class is just littered with players that are going to be either flat out good producers early, or they're going to be the sleeper cell players that we've seen hit in the past few years, where it may take 8 games, 10 games, it may take a year, but there are a lot of talented backs in this class.
And with Brooks's, and I think this is a couple of things that really bother me, even though I again, similar to you, think that his prospects at the next level are really interesting. I feel like there were many times where at the line of scrimmage, he's getting taken down by arm tackles, which bothered me. And I don't know if it was a matter of needing to get the head of steam to really get going, but his patience in some instances would lead to indecisiveness, which allows for the defense to collapse on him and get to him before he's able to really make a play. Because I think when he's in even boxes or boxes that aren't essentially loaded up or there's a +1 defender in the box, I think that he bodes so much better. But when there's a lot of traffic, I remember seeing one specific play where he was able to cut outside of I think it was a corner that came up, beats everybody off the edge and runs in for a score. But the traffic seems to bother him in such a way that his patience turns indecisive far more often than I care to see, which I don't fully know how to deal with that. But I do think there are interesting pieces to his game where if he can speed himself up or speed up his process, I think that there's way more good to be found in his game. And I'm curious if that's something if I'm wish casting, or if that's something that actually there's substantiated hope to be found in what he's able to do. So, Zach, we've got our second six, or at least the second six that we're going over for today. Who knows where Catchall's going to have us, because we've got a lot of players that I know people are already excited about us talking about. We haven't even gotten there. But let's talk through how you've got the second six ordered. And again, for those that may be new, the folks that have been rocking, y'all know how this goes. But for the people who may be new, these are our film grades. So these are how we have them graded out for our criteria regarding film. There's much that can change between now and the actual scouting combine and the actual draft in terms of putting the entire process together. But as far as how we have them graded for the film that we've watched, for the anywhere between 8 and 12 games that we watch for each of these guys, in some instances more, because we have to piece things together. Zach, how do you have the second six ordered, and where do they land in the landscape of the 12 that we've talked about thus far?
So I'm just going to roll through the 12 because it's going to be easier that way. But I've got Ashton Jeanty. We talked about him last week. He is the clear one, tier by himself. Not generational, but not too far off. He's an upper echelon back at the next level. The next tier is a tier of 1, and it's Quinshon Judkins for me. Still there, still in his own tier. Tier 3 is also a tier of 1, and I was really surprised by this. I owe Cam Skattebo an apology, because I put off watching his film for a long time because I saw a little bit and was like, he's slow. That's not a player that he is a clear tier by himself at number 3 right now for me. And then I've got a group of players that I really like, and it seems like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It feels like that's not a great place to be, but this is a really, really good tier of Travion Henderson, Ollie Gordon, Omarion Hampton, Caleb Johnson, and Dylan Sampson. Like that's a really good group right there that I really enjoy, and you're not going to get too much pushback from me however you order them. I know a lot of people have Hampton up higher. I know you really enjoyed Caleb Johnson. Like this is a really solid tier 4, or this, how can this be a tier 4? But this is a great group. And then I've got RJ Harvey and Tahj Brooks in a group behind that. And then pulling up the rear, Jordan James and Devin Neal. But we've been through 12 running backs. There's not one that I don't want to roster on a fantasy team. That's unheard of. Like I've never seen a class where there are 12 players that I'm like, yeah, I will draft them. There's always a group of like 5 or 6 that I'm like, yep, this is the group. And then you guys can fight over all of the, the sleepers and the players that are left. Have fun with that. This is a group where I think that we're going to be at the mercy of the NFL as to whether or not there are spots enough for all of these players. But holy cow, there are enough players for however many spots there are in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think this continues to push the free agency group of running backs to probably a really uncomfortable place, because after last season's free agency group and all of the shifting of spots, and obviously Saquon and Derrick Henry being the headliners and Josh Jacobs having the year that he had, and Jones and the like, we're not looking at any wildly special players this go around. Obviously Aaron Jones one more time as a year older, but this is going to be fun to see where all these guys go, and if they can all get to, not all, but if many of them can get to day 2, this is fun. Similar to you, Zach, I have Ashton Genty in a tier of his own. Quinshon Judkins, who, for those that may not have heard before, he's my favorite player in this entire class. He's in a tier of his own at number 2. Then next up, I've got a tier of, it looks like 3. 3 actually. Caleb Johnson would be my RB3 right now. Cam Skattebo as my RB4, and I would not have.
How did we end up here?
Wouldn't have guessed it. And so for you to be at 3, and I think I told you before, I said you're going to be shocked. Boy, I've got Skattebo, but you're not. No, you're not.
I am.
Yeah, I've got Skattebo at 4, and just a tick behind him, but also in that same tier, Travion Henderson of Ohio State at 5. The next tier is actually all by his lonesome. I've got Omarion Hampton. And then a slight tick down from him, and I think this is where it kind of gets muddled, so I'll stop tiering for the sake of clarity here. I've got Ollie Gordon right behind Omarion Hampton, and again, Ollie Gordon, someone that I'm pretty excited about. After that, the same score I have for Dylan Sampson and Devin Neal. They're both right next to each other there. And then the last 3 currently have Tahj Brooks, RJ Harvey, and this one thing is not like the other for me is Jordan James. He's the one player I don't think that I'm as excited about in a lot of this running back group. But again, we are looking at a lot of players that are going to do a lot of really positive things, I think, at the next level, or at least have the potential to. And this is really fun, because I don't think I have this many highly rated running backs in any of the notes that I'm able to keep up with since we've been doing this in terms of this many higher scores. So this is fun, Zach. This is really fun.
It's the Mesa. Like, there is such a group of really talented running backs. It'll be interesting to see how we parse out the receivers in this class. and then the quarterbacks and the tight ends. But just based on the running backs, this is a very good class. We talked about it before. It's asymmetrically good. So you're going to have to adjust your thinking in rookie drafts.
Zac, I think what's going to be interesting, and for those who maybe didn't hear the running back that you wanted to hear about, we've heard you previously, and I believe it was Greg in last week's chat, or maybe 2 weeks ago when we were requesting folks to go ahead and throw out their catch-all options. I know we've got the likes of LeQuint Allen. I know we've got the likes of Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn. I know that many people are excited about some of the guys even further down, the Bashaw Tutons of the world, the Kyle Monunga out of Rutgers. There's a couple players that I don't know that I want to talk about right now because I don't want to get so excited because I've got them a little higher than many may have. But there are players in this group this year that I think have people really excited, whether it's Damian Martinez out of Miami, Rashard Smith out of SMU, a lot of guys. Catch-all is going to be fun, and we still want to hear from you. If there are players that you didn't hear, because next week we're moving away from running backs, even though we'll be coming back later on in a few more weeks, but next week is going to be the first batch of wide receivers. So if there's a running back that you want to hear about, that you want us to be able to watch in preparation for that, hey, why is my guy not up there with the rest of those guys? Hey, it's all love, and we want to hear from you. Reach out to us. Let us know who you'd like for us to be able to check out, and we're happy to be able to put a show together or two.
Yeah.
Or three.
I'll tell you what, it's nice. We have the run of the Fantasy Cares YouTube channel on Tuesday nights. Joey Wright has got Mondays. He's doing his trivia show. Wednesdays, I'm coming back to talk about food because I'm always hungry with Scott Fish and Bob Gilchrist and Russ Fisher. But Tuesday nights, we got the run of the place until they tell me differently, as long as we want it.
You heard it here first. We got the keys. Thank you, Scott Fish. We appreciate you, bro. Zac, that's really all that I've got. This is fun, man. This is already. I don't want to be hyperbolic about this, but golly, man, this group of running backs, this is a good time. So thank you. This is great. I'm excited.
Yeah, it really is. We may be a less excited to talk next week about wide receivers, but I'm going to be excited to be here to talk to you, regardless of the topic. So it is. This is my favorite time of year. I feel like this is value added from us to the community, and it's reciprocal. I mean, having the chat here is awesome. Having our listeners out on the podcast end of things is awesome. I'm always floored when we start back up and I fire off the first couple of episodes and we're getting, more downloads than we probably deserve after such a long layoff. And it's really humbling. It's really nice that you're here. So continue to interact with us. Like JMic said, if we missed players, there is an audience participation portion of this program. The catch-all is for you because we missed some. And we want to know who. We want to know who you want to hear. But this is so much fun for us. Really appreciate you being here, riding with us. JMic is at JMic Check. I am at Tacit Assassin 13. This has been the Dynasty Dummies. Thank you for listening.